Today we're talking about the Australian guy who used AI to cure his dog's cancer. Sort of. Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief. Today's episode is nominally about this guy who used AI to cure his dog's cancer, or at least that's what everyone was talking about online. But more broadly, it's about the state of the AI discourse. And I think that the starting question that we need to ask, taking a big step back from all of the headlines, is what the heck is going on right now? The AI discourse out there is absolutely frenetic right now. You've got Bernie Sanders dropping 9-minute-long videos about X-Risk, CEOs like Bill McDermott from ServiceNow dropping insanely terrifying statistics all over the mainstream media. In this case, a casual prediction that AI is going to cause recent college graduate unemployment over 30%. Every time a poll comes out in America, it shows just increasingly negative sentiment around AI. Which, who knows, maybe has something to do with all these media outlets publishing these scary predictions. But then on the flip side, you've got normal people who haven't coded before, managing teams of a dozen agents or more, doing all of this work that was never possible for them before. The divergence, in other words, between mainstream perception and actual capability has never been higher, and yet both of them are in this incredibly heightened state. So what is going on? The short of it is, and this is a concept that I imagine we'll end up exploring a lot in the near term, I think that we are in AI's second moment. Obviously, in this case, I'm using AI as shorthand for generative AI, and the first moment was the ChatGPT moment at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. This moment was the Claude Code, Opus 4.5, Codex 5.2, etc. moment. And if you want to be really reductive about it, it's the AI moment and the agents moment. At the beginning of the month, Ethan Malik tweeted, "From an AI user perspective, the 4 big leaps so far in ability. 1, GPT 3.5, ChatGPT November 2022, 2, GPT-4 Spring 2023, 3, Reasoners starts with O1 preview but the real deal was O3 Spring 2025, 4, Workable Agentic Systems, Harness plus Good Reasoner Models December 2025. But really I think his first 2 and his second 2 were all part of one thing. And remember, in and around the first time we also got some really heightened frenetic discourse. You might remember in May of 2023, which was the second month of this show, when Time magazine dropped an issue called The End of Humanity, a special report on how real is the risk. So the point that I'm making is that if this really is AI's second moment, it makes sense that the cloud of dust being kicked up around it is proportionally bigger and more heightened and more dramatic than even the important conversations we've had in between these two moments. And to some extent, I think part of what we're experiencing is just a resurfacing of everything that came up in the wake of the first moment, with some key differences now. The first difference is that there's obviously been a huge increase in capabilities. ChatGPT with 3.5 was amazing. You combine that with some of the image generation capabilities of the models that were coming out around then, and people who were trying these tools absolutely felt like wizards. You didn't really have to convince most people. If they tried these tools, they realized that something big was changing. And yet, even in those early days, there was still this idea of something even bigger. The first episode that I ever had go viral, at least in the terms of a show like this on YouTube, was about an early prototype agent. We had experiments like AutoGPT and Baby AGI, a GPT engineer, which would form the seeds that would go on to be lovable. And so 2 years later, as agents really come online, that big increase in capabilities has, I think, proportionally heightened the discourse once again. A second big change between the first moment and the second moment is that there are now many more people in the conversation. Around the ChatGPT moment, these tools were some of the fastest growing we'd ever seen. Remember, ChatGPT got its first 100 million users in its first 5 weeks, beating the previous record of 8 months for TikTok. But now we have literally billions of people using these tools every week. Even people who don't like the tools are using the tools. So there are just far more people in the conversation. A third difference between the first moment and the second moment is higher economic stakes. And in this case, I'm not even really talking about theoretical future job displacement things. I'm talking about right here and right now. Wall Street's interaction with SaaS companies, AI infrastructure build-out deals and the private financing thereof, valuations for private companies that are building AI, etc., etc., etc. Anthropic wasn't even a blip on the radar to most people then, and now it's at a $19 billion run rate, taking down industries every time it announces a new feature. A fourth key difference between AI's first moment and second moment has nothing to do with AI itself, but has to do with the evolution of the market between 2022 and 2026. AI is now useful as a corporate fall guy, specifically in the context of companies trying to undo overhiring in the post-COVID period. Investor Chamath Palihapitiya writes, "What if AI doesn't need to show an immediate ROI, but instead is the plausible deniability companies use to RIF 50% of the workforce they already knew did nothing. Number 5, no matter what you think of the politics of the moment, I think it's fairly inarguable that finally, as a difference between the first and second moment, this is happening in the context of generally increased political volatility. In other words, AI isn't the only thing happening in the world. It's now interacting with things like war in Iran. There is a last difference which I could point out, is that we've now had 3.5 years of the AI industry doing a completely awful job of explaining itself and talking about the future in any way that's going to be even remotely resonant to the average person. Not Boring's Packy McCormick recently tweeted, AI is very weird for me, because normally I'd be the guy who'd argue that it's crazy we're not more excited about this miracle technology. But I completely get the negative sentiment. AI companies have clearly botched telling the story. That's a big piece of this. Telling people, we built this thing that is definitely going to take your job, and hopefully we can figure out how to give you handouts or something on the other side, or come up with even better jobs or whatever, say thank you, is clearly terrible messaging. Anyways, it's a much longer tweet, but I think that the incredibly poor messaging from the AI industry is absolutely another thing that has changed between the first and the second moment. Not that there was good messaging around that first moment, mind you, there just hadn't been as much time for us to shoot ourselves in the foot over and over yet. The point of this is, right now, everything around the AI discourse is incredibly heightened. The whole conversation is at an 11 all the time, and basically has been since we all returned to work at the beginning of 2026. There were 2 conversations that really demonstrated this weekend. The first was around a weekend project from developer Carpathy that became an absolute firestorm. At 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday night, Kaito on X tweeted, 5 minutes ago, Carpathy just dropped Carpathy/jobs. He scraped every job in the US economy, 342 occupations from BLS, scored each one's AI exposure 0 to 10 using an LLM, and visualized it as a tree map. If your whole job happens on a screen, you're cooked. Average score across all jobs is 5.3 out of 10. Software devs, 8 to 9. Roofers, 0 to 1. Medical transcriptionists, 10 out of 10. Skull emoji. It pointed to this link, carpathy.ai/jobs, which is the full chart. Instantly, Twitter was flooded with takes like this one from Tukey. Siren emoji, do you understand what Carpathy just did? He didn't write an opinion piece. He scraped every single job in America, ran it through AI, and scored how replaceable you are, on a scale of 1 to 10. Not a prediction, a diagnosis. Accountants scored 9, paralegals 9, copywriters cooked, radiologists reading scans, the AI already does it faster. The only jobs that scored low are the ones that require you to physically touch something. In 2015, learn to code was the answer to everything. In 2025, code writes itself. The people who listen are now the most replaceable generation in history. I guess your degree didn't prepare you for a career. Even people who aren't usually schlock merchants like that started to veer into this same sort of sensationalist territory. Chubby @Kimanismus writes, Carpathy is by no means interested in hyper-exaggeration. Using AI, he concluded that out of 143 million people working in the US, approximately 57 million are at high to very high risk of their jobs being negatively impacted by AI. That's almost 40%. Let that sink in and consider what it means. Now, at this point, if you listen frequently, you're probably waiting for the yes, but where's the nuance here? Well, first of all, if you go actually read the page that Carpathy posted, which I don't think most of the people who were tweeting about it did, he has a very important caveat on digital AI exposure scores. He writes, these are rough LLM estimates, not rigorous predictions. A high score does not predict the job will disappear. Software developers score 9 out of 10 because AI is transforming their work, but demand for software could easily grow as each developer becomes more productive. The score does not account for demand elasticity, latent demand, regulatory barriers, or social preferences for human workers. Many high-exposure jobs will be reshaped, not replaced. Indeed, Carpathy himself was frustrated by the response. When someone on that original tweet from Kaito said, I can't find it, Andre responded, this was a Saturday morning 2-hour vibe-coded project inspired by a book I'm reading. I thought the code and data might be helpful to others to explore the BLS dataset visually, or color it in different ways or with different prompts or add their own visualizations. It's been wildly misinterpreted, which I should have anticipated even despite the README docs, so I took it down. In another tweet he wrote, the quote-unquote exposure was scored by an LLM based on how digital the job is. This has no bearing on what actually happens to these occupations, which has to do with demand elasticity and a lot more. People are sensationalizing the visualization tool and putting words in my mouth. Now, there was some interesting nuanced conversation about this. The Update newsletter Stefan Schubert wrote, many seem to take this as a reason to believe that the overall pace of automation will be high, but I don't think that makes any sense. Even more to the point, and more insistently phrased, was Chicago Booth economist Alex Imas, who wrote, Exposure does not mean threat of displacement. It can literally mean the opposite. AI-exposed jobs may increase hiring and attract higher wages. It all depends on A, elasticity of consumer demand, and B, number of AI-exposed tasks in a job. Anthropic's Peter McCrory added, I agree strongly with Alex here, and my read is that Claude usage patterns clearly point toward uneven labor market implications. Our recently introduced observed exposure measure aims to identify cases where exposure is more likely to transform into actual displacement, i.e. Claude is used in automated ways for work-related purposes on tasks that are conceptually feasible for LLMs. But no exposure measure is perfect or has monotone predictions. And even when much of a job is automated, the remaining bottleneck tasks may ultimately increase demand for complementary human skills even among highly exposed roles. Toronto economist Kevin Bryan said, I bet $1,000 that from now to 2030, most quote-unquote susceptible jobs see increased share of labor. In the model these types of charts are based on, it is explicitly not AI can substitute, but AI is related. AI is a complement too. Who doesn't want to code right now, for instance? And I think that's all true, and obviously we will continue to discuss the real no BS labor market implications of AI. But the point is, relative to our larger conversation, this frenetic tone to the discourse. Not helping this was the fact that at literally within 1 minute of Kaito posting that thing about Carpathy's research, the Kobayashi letter posted, breaking, Meta is planning sweeping layoffs that could affect 20% or more of the company. Like I said, right now the conversation goes to 11. But it wasn't just the negative side of AI that was at 11. Google DeepMind's Seb Cryer shared an article linked from The Australian that went hyperviral with nearly 13 million views. Vittorio summed it up this way. This is actually insane. Be tech guy in Australia. Adopt cancer-riddled rescue dog, months to live. Pay $3,000 to sequence her tumor DNA. Feed it to ChatGPT and AlphaFold. Zero background in biology. Identify mutated proteins, match them to drug targets. Design a custom mRNA cancer vaccine from scratch. Genomics professor is gobsmacked that some puppy lover did this on his own. Need ethics approval to administer it. Red tape takes longer than designing the vaccine. 3 months, finally approved. Drive 10 hours to get Rosie her first injection. Tumor halves. Coat gets glossy again. Dog is alive and happy. Professor, if we can do this for a dog, why aren't we rolling this out to humans? One man with a chatbot and $3,000 just outperformed the entire pharmaceutical discovery pipeline. We are going to cure so many diseases. I don't think people realize how good things are going to get. So here's the story. Australian entrepreneur Paul Coiningham has a dog named Rosie. In 2024, Rosie was diagnosed with cancer that ended up being non-responsive to chemotherapy or surgery. The tumors just kept growing. When Paul turned to ChatGPT for help, it suggested that he should get Rosie's DNA sequenced and then use Google DeepMind's AlphaFold to look for mutations that could be a target for immunotherapy. When a drug maker wouldn't provide an off-the-shelf immunotherapy treatment, Coiningham turned to Pally Thordarson, the director of the RNA Institute at the University of New South Wales. Thordarson used Rosie's DNA to develop a bespoke mRNA vaccine in less than 2 months. He told the press, "This is the first time a personalized cancer vaccine has been designed for a dog. This is still at the frontier of where cancer immunotherapeutics are, and ultimately we're going to use this for helping humans. What Rosie is teaching us is that personalized medicine can be very effective and done in a time-sensitive manner with mRNA technology." Now, as you can tell, there is a lot more to this process than simply prompting ChatGPT to cure cancer. And indeed, even the treatment itself wasn't entirely successful. Yes, some of Rosie's tumors have shrunk, but it would be certainly going too far to call it a cancer cure. On top of that, it's arguably a story about how revolutionary the Nobel Prize-winning AlphaFold model is rather than a story about ChatGPT. Pally Thordarson ended up turning to X to explain some nuances of the story. The nuances include the fact that this was less about a cure and more about buying time, the fact that it's difficult to estimate the real costs, as lots of people donated time and resources to this. A third nuance is that regulation of vet research and treatment is obviously quite different than human health. But ultimately, Pally says, in the human health space, Rosie's story demonstrates that we can democratize the process of designing cancer vaccine. While genomic analysis and RNA production will continue to be specialized, they could turn into pure service provision, especially as automation increases. This then begs the question, do we need to overhaul the regulatory regimes with this in mind? And can we ensure equitable access? Now, of course, there were tons of people who were skeptical on spec when they saw the story, even before all that nuance was shared. And what's more, unsurprisingly, I personally find it a little bit refreshing to have people excited about the positive disruptive potential of AI than to just be constantly looking at the negative. But the point is that these are still two sides of the same coin. We are in the midst of the transition into AI's second moment. And for a little while, until we all get used to the new paradigm that we're living in, it's gonna be weird. All I can promise is that if you hang out around here, you will feel at least slightly less like you're taking crazy pills. For now, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Appreciate you listening or watching, as always. And until next time, peace.